Perched midway up a precarious rock face, it seems to hang in midair. A sacred shrine that could, at any time, crash and tumble disastrously onto the rocky floor below. But after 1,400 years, it's still up there. An architectural miracle born of engineering genius. The Hanging Monastery of China is one of the 7 wonders of China. On the sheer cliffs of sacred Mount Hen, supported only by wooden beams, the Hanging Monastery has inspired awe for over a millennium.
感觉很壮观哎，嘿，哦，难得一见。
And what is really amazing is that it's wooden. It's wood. There's no iron. It's just the same it was. So it's unbelievable. It's great. "230 miles from Beijing, the Hanging Monastery lies well off the beaten track. Close to the sleepy backwater towns of Shanxi province, it's hard to imagine that the villagers' simple lives are led in the shadow of such riches and one of China's most famous wonders. While these villagers may be passed by, the Hanging Monastery is one of the country's most popular tourist sites. Suspended 15 stories above the Hen Valley floor, it's a mystery why it was built there and how it survived. In Chinese, it's called the monastery suspended in a void. One reason for its peculiar position could be the floods that used to plague the valley. Today, a dam controls the river, making the building easily accessible to visitors, if they're brave enough.
Many people visit the Hanging Monastery every year. And the first question they ask is, why is the monastery built on the west cliff of Jinxia Gorge? The gorge is 30 miles long, and the mountains block the wind from the north and south. The monastery is built in an indentation in the cliff beneath an overhang. That's why the building is still intact after 1,400 years, in spite of weathering. Its surroundings reduce the destructive force of nature.
But even so, it's a wonder that the harsh local climate hasn't brought the monastery down. It's been rocked by earthquakes and savagely whipped by the wind for thousands of years. In fact, even when the Great Hong Tong earthquake hit the province in 1303, with a force that would measure 8.0 on the Richter scale, the Hanging Monastery escaped undamaged. As the building itself has withstood the storms, so generations of religious pilgrims have battled nature's wrath to reach the monastery. Such devotion may be explained by its location in the rock face of Mount Hen, one of China's 5 most sacred mountains. The famous Chinese poet Li Bai was so inspired by the mountain that he carved the word wonder into its rocks, a feeling echoed by today's tourists.
叹为观止，太伟大了！这个工程，没法想象1000多年能建造这么一种建筑，这种构思没办法想象得出来的。 施工就更困难。
Shanxi Province is one of the birthplaces of Chinese civilization. It was a great center of trade and commerce during the Ming Dynasty, and China's first bank opened here as fortunes were made and lost. The Hanging Monastery was a nearby stop where travelers would pray to the gods for luck and good fortune, or a safe passage home.
According to records, the Hanging Monastery was built over 1400 years ago in the Northern Wei Dynasty. That was when Buddhism was just starting to take hold in China. The emperors of the Northern Wei Dynasty were staunch Buddhists, and the religion flourished under them. The Hanging Monastery was part of a huge surge in the construction of temples and monasteries. So the building's roots are in Buddhism.
Although it is not known exactly who built the monastery, the style of the construction reflects the characteristics of the Buddhist structures that were built during the same period. But through the centuries, pilgrims of different faiths left their mark on the monastery, creating a unique, multi-faith shrine.
For 1,000 years after it was built, people passing by brought Taoist and Confucian beliefs to the monastery.
In one particular cave room, there are 3 different statues: Buddha, Confucius, and Lao Tzu sitting side by side. A rare religious occurrence advocating 3 different religions in one place.
So everyone, regardless of religion, can come to the monastery. When more people visit a place of worship, it has a better chance of survival.
3个宗教放在玄空寺里面，可以避免上政治上的干扰。
Since it upheld the 3 religions, it wasn't affected by political interference. There was no conflict between the monastery and an emperor's beliefs. It's this unique characteristic that keeps the place intact.
The building is a tribute to the talents of the engineers who were far ahead of their time. They made the monastery to last by making the actual cliff a vital part of the building's foundation.
第一个特点有一句话叫做依山作基，就是玄空寺。
The monastery was built with a foundation formed out of the rocks jutting out of the cliff.
利用岩石出来的岩石作为它的基。
It's not just floating in mid-air.
What the naked eye can't see from below is that the Hanging Monastery is actually built into the cliff face. More than 40 cave rooms were dug into the rocks to hold precious religious statues of all shapes and sizes. This process was also crucial to lending the building its much-needed support. It seems the ancient builders chose well in their location of the monastery. Millions of footsteps have walked the planks of the monastery's passages without harm, and earthquakes and storms have failed to dislodge it from the rock.
整个的木质结构呢，又是木质框架结构，它整
The entire structure is built extremely well.
所以它不管你是地震，
No matter the strength of the earthquake
玄空寺它和岩石都，
or the amount of walking,
岩石按照什么样的，
it will not bring down the construction
按照哪个平面，
because of the tightly fused rock structure.
它是木质框架结构。你从远处看，好像
From afar,
什么神
you feel like there is a special force holding the place, and the monastery looks like it is an extension of the rock, and the other half of the monastery seems to be hidden inside the rocks. This is the feeling it gives.
从另外一个
From another perspective,
整个这个玄空寺
the whole monastery looks like it is flying to the sky.
构成天地。
We cannot find another construction in the whole of China that is built like the Hanging Monastery. Therefore, in 1982, the State Museum proclaimed the monastery as a national treasure.
The remoteness of the Hanging Monastery is only made possible by the unique and ingenious techniques of construction. But there was always a spiritual purpose behind it too.
所以宗教建筑尤其是要注重精神上的。
This space surrounding the construction can affect a person's mind and body. This is taken into account when choosing and building places of worship. The highest level of Tao cultivation and teaching is to be a deity. And Taoists believe that the deity resides on high mountains, amongst the most basic of nature.
This is one reason why the monastery and its treasures have stood proud on the cliff for more than 1,400 years. The rest of the monastery consists of wooden walkways, pavilions, and balconies, all of which jut out of the cliff as though suspended in midair. And it's this illusion that's fascinated visitors to the monastery for hundreds of years. Part of the mystery is solved when you notice that the building is supported by horizontal beams inserted into the rock face. But even then, it's remarkable that nothing else lies between the monastery and the valley floor.
它是首先在这个悬崖峭壁上水平的打一排洞，然后呢，
First, the builders made a stretch of horizontal holes in the cliff.
插在里面，
Then, they inserted wooden chips along with the beams for a tight fit.
挤紧了。这个木头是
They used a special type of wood, Chinese hemlock.
叫做
Chinese hemlock isn't easily affected by moisture.
怕水，非常坚硬，
It's very dense, heavy, and hard.
非常沉。铁杉木
The beams work as sort of a cantilever.
叫做
They are like suspended arms.
好像一个戈壁悬在这儿。
For over a millennium, visitors to the Hanging Monastery have trusted their fate to these ordinary-looking wooden beams that are jammed into holes in the steep rock wall. But behind this apparently simple method is a clever technique that has left modern builders in awe of their ancestors.
我们悬空式的悬背梁和其他地方的悬背梁不一样，就是什么不一样呢？这口儿特别小，这开口啊，
Our cantilever beams are different from others.
里面呢越大。
The holes in the cliff are smaller around the opening than inside. Before a beam was inserted, it was sawed open at one end and filled with wood chips.
悬背梁锯开，然后
When the beam was pushed into the hole, the chips split the beam and made it so snug that it couldn't be pulled out.
这个就拔不出来了。这怎么发现的？就是我们在
We discovered this when we tried to pull out a rotten beam.
那个悬背梁
It was impossible.
拔就拔不出来的。最后怎么办呢？就把它锯
When we
断
sawed and chiseled at it, we discovered the wood chips. Then we realized how amazing our ancestors were.
哎呀，我们就发现我们的老祖宗太了不起了。
The method of wedging the beams into the cliff face had modern engineers stumped. Although a walk along the floors is more than a little hair-raising, the Hanging Monastery has held firm, safely supporting millions of footsteps since it was built. Its builders always believed their work would last forever. But why? The beams wedged into the cliff were actually never meant to be replaced. They were treated in a way that made the wood virtually indestructible.
就用着生桐油啊刷上去，让它把那个油都吃进去。
The builders brushed the beams with raw tung oil, 4 to 5 times, so there was a thick layer of oil that seeped into the wood.
然后外面再
Then they painted over the wood with processed tung oil.
古代的油漆
Processed tung oil was made by heating it to 520 degrees Fahrenheit. The whole monastery was treated in this way.
所以整个我们悬空寺建筑都是这样。
These unique preservation methods have yielded results that are astonishing even by today's building standards. Glancing at the structure, it looks suspiciously like the beams get more than a little support from vertical wooden poles resting on tiny rock ledges. But it's easy to be misled.
实际上，我们这个细的柱子都是装饰性。
In fact, The thin pillars are just for decoration, to give people more confidence to go up to the monastery. If we use thick pillars, the monastery wouldn't look like it's hanging. But if we didn't use any pillars, it looked too unstable and nobody would go up. That's why all the pillars are very thin. They actually don't give any support to the monastery.
So the wooden pillars, which appear to protect the tourists, really don't support them at all. They were put there within the last century, just to make the monastery look more stable for the faint-hearted. Otherwise, one look down and most of them would abandon any idea of walking in a void. History, as well as the monastery, clings hard to this particular rock face. The valley below has seen more than its fair share of conflict. There were times when armored troops stormed along ancient cliff roads through the valley. The inspiration for building the Hanging Monastery was the construction of these highways etched into the cliffs.
In 1982, the National Museum declared the Hanging Monastery a national treasure because of its architecture. It's a good example of the development and evolution of ancient cliff roads.
These cliff roads played a crucial role in China's military history. There are many stories of troops using them to ambush an enemy in hostile terrain. In the valley beneath the Hanging Monastery, holes remain from over 1,000 years ago, when these roads were built and fixed to the cliff wall. Perhaps these roads layered with planks also provide a clue to how and why the monastery was built so high up on the cliff.
没有栈道的建筑的经验，就不可能有悬空寺的建设。
Without the experience of building ancient cliff roads, it wouldn't have been possible for people to build the Hanging Monastery. Creating roads along the cliffs was one of the greatest inventions of the ancient Chinese.
The roads that run near the Hanging Monastery today carry no trace of the battles and bloodshed of the past. The paths that used to lead to war now guide people through a province where time has brought peace and relative prosperity. Walking through the streets of nearby towns, it's hard to imagine that only 40 years ago, the whole country was in turmoil. For 10 years, the Maoist Red Guard swept through China with their Cultural Revolution, destroying all religious structures and statues that stood in their way. It was a time of chaos, violence, and upheaval. Monks living in the Hanging Monastery were forced to abandon it and work in the fields. The Cultural Revolution changed the course of China's future, but the monastery survived and continued to hang onto the cliff face of Mount Hen. One particular room in the Hanging Monastery serves as a reminder of this chapter in Chinese history. Statues with their hands cut off and eyes gouged out stand solemnly side by side. Cracks in their necks show where they were decapitated. Some statues still remain headless, eerie tokens of when the monastery had one of its closest brushes with destruction. Hanging halfway between heaven and earth, the monastery was perhaps close enough for divine powers to protect it from being completely torn down.
它这个特点和地上不同的特点，就最大特点就在它悬在半空。
The most unique part of the monastery is that it hangs in mid-air. There's a certain form and feel to the space that can affect a person's mind and soul. It's important for religious buildings to have a spiritual impact on people.
尤其是要注重精神上的这个功能。
Buddhists and Taoists place great importance on where they worship. Tranquil environments close to nature are believed to bring enlightenment and disciples closer to the divine. Indeed, few visitors to the Hanging Monastery can leave without a sense of wonder.
after setting foot on a shrine whose continued existence seems to depend as much on the supernatural as the laws of nature. 1,400 years after it was first built, the Hanging Monastery watches over the valley as majestically as ever. Its ancient walkways still bear the heavy load of visitors who stop by on their travels, just as they've always done. It still brings together people of different faiths, but now from all over the globe. And for the less devoted, it's still a vertigo-inducing experience that stirs the stomach and blows the mind.
从对面上看啊，这个寺院呢，建得好像一个小小的
Facing it,
艺术品。
it looks like a miniature piece of art that is set into the cliff.
中国的那个建筑艺术吧，确实非常的精深，啊，还有那个中国古人，比我们想象中呢要高超得多，自己觉得自愧不如。
Truly a wonder of China, the Hanging Monastery has survived all manner of storms and upheaval for more than a millennium. It resolutely refuses to bend to the winds or obey the laws of reason. It is an architectural fantasy that plays with the impossible, a supernatural notion that suspends belief in midair, a superhuman feat that we reluctantly accept as a man-made wonder. The Hanging Monastery remains where it has always been, beyond all expectations, ready to receive 1 million more awestruck pilgrims, tourists, and travelers, trusting in the genius of ancient engineers and the power of faith.